oh my goodness, Miami lost. Are they going to make the playoff? Will they make the ACC championship game? Well, those are ramifications I want to get to in a moment. I just want to start with the initial surprise factor, or for me, a lack thereof. If you're surprised Miami lost this football game, let me ask you a question. Have you watched them play in the last 2 months? Here are their margins of victory. 4 points, 1 point, 7 points, 22 points, but that was against Florida State, and that might as well be an FCS team at this point. 22 points, they trailed by 11 in the third quarter, and here they are losing to Georgia Tech for a second straight year in less heartbreaking fashion. So that's the upside for Miami fans in this spot is, well, they didn't lose because they didn't take a knee at the end of the game. The question becomes, will this derail Miami's season as it did a year ago? I think last year Miami, who was 4-0, ranked in the top 25, blowing that game to Georgia Tech, I think it lost the locker room at least for a little while. And they ended up being a 7-win team in the regular season. I think they would have literally been an 8-win team. I think they could have been a 9 or 10-win team. I think that just sits with you in the wrong way. I say this as a Seahawks fan who watched that interception on the 1-yard line send a franchise into a spiral that it hasn't recovered from. They're yet to get back to the conference championship game. So this is a different loss for Miami. They looked like they were going to stage another spectacular comeback. It turns out you can't plan the margins like this. Now, the Miami defense wasn't a huge problem here. I won't sit here and say they were great, but 23 points is not what Miami's offense usually does. And on the surface, you look and say, well, 28 points, that's not great for Miami's defense, not terrible. Did you know that they allowed a touchdown drive that took 10 and a half minutes? I wish I was kidding. I would love to tell you that wasn't a real thing. 17 plays, 75 yards, 10 minutes, and 45 seconds off the clock to give Georgia Tech a 14-10 lead in the first half. That is sickening if you are a Miami fan. So the idea that Cam Ward's turnovers finally caught up to him in a bad spot, or that the defense wasn't able to make a big play in certain areas when they needed to, I'm not surprised by any of those things. How could you be? Only if you haven't watched Miami this year. They and BYU have something in common. They play on a thin margin style. That's how they're winning games. That's how Miami has won every game this year when it's been close. Is you feel, boy, they were lucky to escape. Boy, they were lucky to escape. Well, eventually you're going to run out of luck. And Miami's ran out today. And guess what? I don't think it's the end of the world. I really don't. Because Miami, in all likelihood, I haven't examined the ACC tiebreakers yet because I feel like Clemson's got another loss in them. Gosh, Clemson is just... they've just fallen off a cliff in the second half of this season. But if that happens, SMU's the only unbeaten in the ACC right now, which is a crazy thing to say. Miami and Clemson do not play each other, and Miami gets to go into a bye. They get to rectify some of these issues, come back out of the bye with a vengeance at home against an average at best Wake Forest team who lost to Cal in a barn burner on Friday night. And then they go at Syracuse. If Miami wins their next two games, they're into the playoff. Doesn't matter what else happens. They're going to drop after losing to Georgia Tech on the road. Now, the Yellow Jackets are a bowl team, and so, or at least I believe they should be. Georgia Tech right now. Yep, they're 6-4 now. So that's a bowl team on the road. You're going to be punished for that in the rankings, and you should. You absolutely should be. But Miami's not going to fall down out of the top 12, or at the very least, not that far away from it. I think the furthest they could drop would be down to 13, and I don't even think they go that far. I think they probably hover in the 10-11 range. And so if you win your final two regular season games, Miami's still going to get themselves into the playoff no matter what, because I don't think the committee is keen. First of all, you can win the ACC, but if you don't get there, you're 11-1 in a Power 4 conference. I don't think that's going to get left out. If you go to the ACC title game and lose 11-2, we're going to punish someone for making a conference championship game? I don't believe so. So I think everything is still in front of Miami here. Maybe it depends on what happens elsewhere, but I seriously doubt that an 11-win team from any conference doesn't get into the playoff automatically. I find that incredibly hard to believe, whether that is Penn State in the Big Ten or BYU in the Big 12 or Miami in the ACC or Indiana in the Big Ten. Can't see it happening, and I don't think it should happen. You win 11 of your 12 regular season games. This is the whole point of the expanded playoff that everybody wanted, is you can have a little bit more margin for error, so a loss is not quite as punitive. And Miami loses this game. I wasn't that surprised, but it doesn't. I don't think it ends their season at all. I don't even think it diminishes their chances to make the playoff, but I'm still pretty confident Miami is going to be a college football playoff team. Just watch for that game at Syracuse. They're going to go into the bye, try to figure out some things on the defensive side of the ball. Syracuse is a better team than Wake Forest, and you have to play them on the road last week of the regular season. But you win those two games, I think Miami is still into the college football playoff. But the ACC standings are suddenly, shall we say, not what we all expected. Florida State is one of the worst football teams I have seen, which is wild. I did not think they would win the ACC this year. They weren't my pick. I didn't see them being literally the worst team in the Power Four this year. I mean, they're dreadful. Notre Dame blasted them into oblivion because that's what any respectable football team would do, which is what Notre Dame is. They're a respectable football team. Speaking of 11-win teams that won't get left out, Notre Dame, they fall into that category. But suddenly SMU, the new kid on the block, is at the top of the ACC standings. 5-0 in league play. They had a bye this week. SMU's upcoming games: Boston College at home, at Virginia, hosting Cal. They're going to be favored in all of those games. SMU could really find their way into the college football playoff. And speaking of 11-win teams, SMU's overall record is 8-1. Who's their one loss to? A 3-point loss to BYU. BYU, who's ranked in the top 10. BYU, who is 9-0 and just has a refuse-to-lose mentality. Yeah, when you think about playoff teams, I hope you're talking about SMU. Because they control their own destiny to get into the college football playoff. And the likelihood that the Big 12 sends two teams into the college football playoff is exceedingly thin. It's really low. Frankly, the best chance is Colorado wins the Big 12 or somebody else. But Colorado has got one loss, so they're in the driver's seat. Colorado wins the Big 12 and beats BYU after BYU goes 12-0. That's how the Big 12 gets two teams in. You know how the ACC gets two teams in? Way easier than that. I mean, way easier than that. Miami wins their final two regular season games. They're 11-1. SMU wins their final three. They're 11-1. Boom. Both those teams should be written into the playoff. That's how I would vote for it. But I wasn't surprised by the Miami upset. It didn't have the same sort of feel. A lot of people out there are aware. I'm not a huge fan of the 12-team playoff. This Miami game is why. Miami season isn't over after losing this game. In the 4-team era, would have been a serious uphill battle to get themselves back into the playoff. But losing to Georgia Tech, not as punitive as it used to be. You can like that, you cannot like that. That's just the way it is. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.